Welcome to the
North.
Wait
a minute.
What are you doing?
I thought I was interviewing you.
That's true.
That's right.
Yeah, and
this is my show.
But it was
But
my
it's your show. Well, but today it's my show.
Right.
If you're not fully confused yet, this is the Northeast Kingdom Voice. It is Scott Wheeler's show, and he's usually your host. But today, I will be interviewing Scott.
And you're typically the producer.
I'm typically behind.
And I'm the host.
That's right. I'm usually behind the scenes, and you don't see me.
He's the one who tries to make me look fairly smart.
Yeah.
And if you've been watching the show for a while, you probably will agree, if his job truly is to make me look smart, he should be fired.
I probably should be.
But you have a lot of work to do when you.
I do a lot of editing to this show. I'm not gonna lie. I feel bad for the person that edits your books. No, I'm just kidding.
Oh no, I have a Janine Young of Glover does an amazing job. I just wish somebody could edit me before things came out of my mouth, because that would be great.
Like pre-production.
Yeah, pre-production, because sometimes things come out of my mouth, and I'm wondering, where did that come from?
So the reason I'm interviewing Scott today is Scott has a new book out. It's called Booze in the Kingdom, Voices from Prohibition. And this is actually not the first book that you've written about Prohibition, or sort of. Your other one was about the
first book that I ever wrote was a book titled Rum Runners and Revenuers, Prohibition in Vermont. And that was a prohibition statewide. That explored statewide prohibition.
Right.
This one is only about prohibition in the Northeast Kingdom. And what it is, it's a whole collection of the material, the interviews, newspaper articles. Some of it has been seen before. Some of it was in my Rum Runners book.
Right.
But there's a lot of new material. And it's just like, it's probably the final hurrah to my writing about prohibition, because to be realistic is most people who to have been able to remember prohibition, to just remember it even as a child, you'd have to be in your 90s now. So the stories that I've collected were from many years ago, but then I've added new materials, interviews that I did years ago. I have newspaper articles that was great. My only concern about this book is I understand that, I'm not sure if people drink in the Northeast Kingdom anymore.
No,
we're pretty much a dry region.
It's pretty much a dry county. Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. No. But to tell you the truth is, the book is selling very well, because here's the story. Here's the deal. People say they love good news, and I believe in many ways we do, but something about prohibition, or just smuggling, or just outlaws.
Sure.
People just like it.
You can kind of fantasize about it a little bit.
Right. And to tell you the truth is, when you hear about prohibition on television or in the movies, it's a bit romanticized. It's always, oftentimes, it's everybody's getting rich. In reality, people did make money sometimes.
Sure.
Other times you ended up in jail and losing everything.
Right.
And there was a lot of people died because of prohibition. They were, and I mean, it's the outlaws ended up dying, and then sometimes the lawmen, but.
Did people die from bad batches too?
Yes.
I mean, they must have made some pretty horrific stuff back then.
Now, I know you these days. You are a non-drinker.
Right. I used to be a professional.
Yeah, I know you used to.
I've retired.
Right. But back during Prohibition, like up on the border, it wasn't that hard to get alcohol, even though Prohibition officially prohibited the manufacture, transportation, and sale of alcohol. On the border, it really wasn't too much of a big deal, but if you lived in the heartland of the country, or even 100 miles or so away from the border, it was a little bit harder. But and even people here, though, resorted to other forms of alcohol than you typically think about drinking. Like, now, I know you were quite a professional back in your day, but
Sure.
did you ever partake in drinking like extracts, like vanilla extracts to get a buzz?
I did not. I've heard of people that do that, or mouthwash.
Right,
or,
and it became a like while the alcohol, while you could not sell alcohol commercially, well, unless it was for religious purposes, medicinal purposes, the sale of extracts boomed. It went through the roof because people ended up doing that. And the other thing is suddenly priests also needed far more
more wine.
more wine and other alcohol for their ceremonial purposes.
So that's an interesting point. You said for religious purposes. So the priests or pastors could still have wine for their services,
Right.
even though alcohol was technically illegal.
Right. But they ended up getting a lot more.
Sure. Man, they're communion 3-4 times a day.
Yeah. And, but that really...
Man, I don't know about Bill, but he's been going to church an awful lot this year.
and then... but then there was one local barber who was known... I won't tell you his name, but he was known to have a very severe alcohol problem, and hair tonic was another. It was another thing that contained a lot of alcohol.
Wow.
But on the deadly side, there were people that would accidentally they would either make it themselves using wood grain alcohol, or somebody else would mix it in, and people would go blind, people would die. There's one story around here. It was in the newspaper. The guy drank bad bathtub gin, as they call it, homemade,
homegrown.
He drank it, went insane, and killed his entire family. Wow. And that made the news at the time.
Jeez. Well, I was in Tennessee for a few years in my early 20s, and it's a place called Cheatham County.
Right.
And I had some of the real deal moonshine.
Must be that's a Nashville thing. Everybody's got to try it, because when I was in Nashville, I tried real moonshine.
Yeah,
too.
It's pretty rugged, isn't it?
Oh yeah.
And they would soak strawberries in it, and so you just like eat the strawberry to make it go down better. But the strawberry was white,
right.
So Prohibition was in 1920
to 1933.
So it lasted 13 years.
It was a 13-year ill-fated experiment.
What actually brought about Prohibition? Did they just decide that people were getting a little too unruly?
Well, in Vermont actually had Prohibition for 52 years. Vermont as a state during the late 1800s until the first few years of the next century.
Huh.
And
so they just got it back before it.
State prohibition didn't work very well.
No.
But I'm not quite certain how well that was enforced. But the anti-alcohol movement, like the WCTU, the Women Christian Temperance Union, and the Saloon League, which was, I believe it was only men, they fought against alcohol. They said it was ruining the family. And but then what happened was we went to war against Germany during World War I.
Right.
And they used the war to piggyback onto their cause. If you are for alcohol, you're for the enemy, Germany. Why?
Oh, geez.
Because who were a lot of the brewmasters?
Oh, yeah.
They were German, and so they were able to say, okay, if you're for Germany, if you like booze, and next thing you know,
Wow.
these dignified legislators who sold out their souls and said, well, we don't want to look like we're for the enemy. But
Right.
by the time Prohibition actually began, World War I was done.
Right.
When I interviewed
Interesting.
when I interviewed people throughout the years about Prohibition, I interviewed everybody from Clarence Morse of Jay, who's now long gone. Clarence used to run a little bit of booze from Highwater, Quebec.
Yeah.
And he would run it down to Barrie, Vermont. And the thing is Barrie was one of the major depots for alcohol coming across this part of the border. The Italian community down here, as he said, they had an operation where he said they would bring it across from Highwater. Well, they would go to Canada. He and his friends would go drinking, and their mission was not to smuggle booze. They were going there to have a good time. But then as he called them, the money men would go to these bars in Canada and recruit these young people to do the dirty work of bringing the booze down to Barrie for them, because they knew the roads across the border. And he says, well, here's the big time operators. I mean, like the urban people who'd come up here. He said they knew enough not to drink while they're smuggling, because you make bad decisions.
Right.
But he says but on the other hand, when they recruited these young people at Canadian bars to bring loads across, Clarence said, he says, when I was sober, I'd say no. Then they'd give me a drink, and then he said, by about third or fourth drink, it looked pretty good.
Sounded like a good idea.
Right, and he did say the money was phenomenal.
Sure,
for the time. He was making, I think, $8 a week, but he could make, I believe it was $125 a trip. And he said that was hard. That was money that was hard to turn up.
That's pretty good money. If you're only making $8 for your normal job per week.
Right.
Transportation wasn't what it is now either, though. It took a lot longer to get to Barrie, Vermont than it does now.
And it was the routes that you took too. It was the routes that you took that was longer. And like, for example, there's some police chases where it's funny to read in the newspapers that cars got. The speed chase was speeds up to 50 miles an hour, and
watch out.
Yeah. Now on the flip side, though, and his story isn't in this book because he wasn't from the Northeast Kingdom. The man who went on to be, well, you're a musician. I don't know if you plan to live this long, but Sterling Weed was one time America's oldest band leader from St. Albans. Huh. And he had the honor of playing in bars. He was a musician all of his life, and Sterling had he said he never drank alcohol once in his life, other than that was in cough medicine at the time. That was loaded with.
Oh, sure.
But the thing is he played at bars before Prohibition, during Prohibition, and after Prohibition. Well, I say bars. His was a little more for the most part, upscale. And just to put some age to them, he said one group that really loved the party was he actually played for Asian Civil War veterans. That's how old he was.
Wow.
He played, but he was a staunch prohibitionist to the day he died. He felt the world was a better place when he said it's true that people still drank during Prohibition, but they didn't drink to such a degree. And he says before Prohibition, when he was playing in bars, in dance halls, before Prohibition, people were really kind of out of control, and they thought more of the alcohol than their families. He says during Prohibition, he said there was, of course there was still drinking, but it wasn't so out there. He said he felt it was a much more tamer world. And then he said all hell broke loose after Prohibition, where so he died. He was a prohibitionist to the day he died. He felt he and Everett Willard, a fella from Orleans who grew up in Charleston, Derby, Charleston border area, they both felt that if the United States had kept on its same track with Prohibition, that in time people would have grown accustomed to not having alcohol, and it wouldn't be abused so widely as it is today. I'm not sure if I buy it personally.
It's hard to say. I mean, it really, as somebody, so if you're just watching, 5 years ago, I got completely sober. Right. And as somebody that's sober, you realize how ingrained into society alcohol truly is. When I was a practicing alcoholic, I suppose, you don't notice it as much. But when you get sober, you really, really realize it's just woven into the fabric of who we are. So it's almost incomprehensible to somebody like people like us that we've never seen Prohibition. It must have been a weird time because there's always two sides to everything. So when it became legal again, you had people that were elated, I'm sure, and like this gentleman, not so elated that it was.
No, we've talked about this before. When you were a practicing near professional drinker.
I was a professional.
And when you were up on
expert.
And when you were a performer in bars, when in nightclubs and everything, when you were drinking, you kind of thought you probably felt kind of cool, and you thought the people looked kind of cool drunk. But now when you're you're no longer a drinker, when you're playing in a bar, what do you see?
It's it's a whole different thing. I actually kind of I do not mind being around it, but I get to a point where that's enough, and I just need to leave.
Yeah.
And that cutoff is about 2 hours. Thankfully, as a folk musician, most of the places that I play are a little more, people just have a glass or two of wine or maybe a craft beer or something, and people aren't there to get completely obliterated. Right. So I don't have to deal with a lot, but weddings or other functions or occasionally places that I play, after about 2 hours, that seems to be the tipping point when people start to go cuckoo bananas.
Right.
And at that point, I don't mind being around it, but I don't particularly enjoy it. And I just kind of sneak out. And the great thing is, I used to feel bad that I would leave early. Like people would think I didn't like them. But then I realized they're so drunk, they didn't even know that I left.
Yeah, but I'm going to tell you, though.
They probably thought I was there with them the whole time.
Let me tell you about aging. I have a few years old. There's actually there was a day when you didn't forget about alcohol, that you wanted to stay at the party. Once you get older, you just say, how can I sneak out without anybody noticing?
Right.
Because I want to go home, go to bed. And
right.
But by the way, if any of the viewers are wondering what these photos are that are going through, those are just some of the photos that that you would
see in this book.
You'd see in the book.
So I have a question for you. You're in your 50s.
Yes.
So in another 30 years, you'll be in your 80s.
I'll be dead.
You don't think you'll be alive in your 80s?
My father's going to be turning 85 on October 24th, and he's about, for a male in the family, he is pushing all the limits. I don't know. Really? Yeah, because his brothers passed away, I think, before they were 70. The women in the family, they do pretty well, but the men, he's pushing the limits.
So, well, if you are still around, I assume that you're not going to retire. You're always going to race.
I'm always going to do something.
Is there going to be a marijuana in the kingdom? Prohibition voices from prohibition.
In all seriousness, I actually have thought about it because
there's some parallels.
Yeah, no, there really are. Even the roots and the ways they go, they have gone about smuggling marijuana into the country, and while some people made their own alcohol using stills, we also know there's people who they grew their own crops, and they still do.
Except now they can.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And
well, they're allowed a certain amount, and I'm sure everybody sticks to that limit.
Oh yeah, I'm sure, because I'm sure, and because like I even grew up with people who took that track and became cross-border marijuana smugglers, and a couple of them have spent a considerable amount of time even in federal prison. And I remember telling one of them, I remember saying, well, look at the good news. Before he went to prison, I said, well, we'll have a darn good story to tell in the years to come.
Well, it's just really similar. The only difference being marijuana wasn't legal before. Well, I think at some point, I think in colonial times it wasn't illegal.
Right.
It became illegal at a certain point. I don't know the years because I wasn't planning on asking this question, but it really is essentially the same thing. Right. And now states are slowly starting to. I mean, I wouldn't. What do you say? In 5 years, it'll be just legal across.
I think so. And people talk about. I'm not an advocate of marijuana in any way, but if you really want to talk about the gateway drug. Alcohol.
It's absolutely alcohol.
Alcohol. But on the flip side, I do sit back and chuckle when now we're turning into a marijuana show, but I do chuckle about some of the.
Hey, it's legal.
I chuckle about some of the people like there used to be. Posters and movies, Reefer Madness. That you're gonna go
I've seen these.
But on the flip side, now it's insane. Oh, if you have an ingrown toenail, smoke pot, it'll cure it.
It cures everything.
If you have cancer, and it's like for example, if you look at I once did the parallels between cigarette smoke and marijuana smoke. Like at one time. Like, I'm even old enough to remember where you could smoke in a hospital.
Yeah.
And doctors,
actually,
if you went to your doctor back in, I think as late as the early 70s, maybe later, they might offer you a cigarette. And I have newspaper ads from the 1920s, 30s, and 40s encouraging people to, whether if you were pregnant, to smoke, it will calm your nerves.
Oh, jeez.
And the other
That's what's wrong with this country.
And the other one, it helped curb obesity.
Yeah, sure.
And so in other words, is at some point we're going to have to find a certain level of normalcy with this whole marijuana thing.
Well, even with alcohol, I mean, it used to be an anesthetic for operations.
Alcohol was used for everything.
Yeah, it still is. They cook with it.
Right. And the thing is
you can cook with marijuana too.
When especially like how many people, take they don't have a cold, but they'll down a bunch of NyQuil.
I hear that all the time. Like, I have a cold. Oh, you know what you should do is you should drink some hot brandy before you go to bed.
Right.
Well, no.
Right.
For one, that is not a good idea for me.
Right.
Especially if you want to see me the next week.
Well, and alcohol, it really was used in many forms of medicine. It's like I was just interviewing a person in her 90s, and her kids ribber because they all like the taste of liquor.
Yeah.
And they loved the river because when their teeth were coming in, she would take liquor and
rub it on the gums.
Rub it on the gums. And but no, alcohol was used for everything. But the interesting thing about Prohibition was when it ended, it didn't just Franklin Delano Roosevelt, when he was running for the presidency, one of his campaign posters was Roosevelt and beer, because he promised to give the beer back.
Oh,
and
really?
So soon after he was elected,
in a landslide.
Yeah, he did give beer back, but then it slowly became all forms of alcohol. But
Interesting.
The thing is then towns had local options. They could choose to say dry or wet. Like, for example, big decisions were made whether you were a dry community or a wet community. I know you're a golfer, but as the story goes, I don't know if you realize, but Newport Country Club, it might be the Newport Country Club, but a fair amount of it is actually in Derby.
Yeah, it's pretty much just like the clubhouse. It's a Newport, right?
But the thing is, as the story goes, the clubhouse was actually strategically located in Newport versus Derby, because at the time that the original clubhouse was built, Derby was a dry community and Newport was a wet community. So they wanted to make sure that the golfers could partake in alcohol in the clubhouse, so they made sure it was positioned in Newport. Because I'm not a golfer, but I've been told that there's more to hitting a ball with a stick and chasing around after. I understand that some people also like to partake.
Most golfers are especially in men's league.
Right. Most
of the golfers are they have an extra incentive.
Right. Yeah, I think that's maybe why I have a friend, the Reverend Barker, and his wife Carol Ann. They live on Pine Hill, and between getting their window, they get there. One time they got the mirror knocked out of the truck. Their house has been hit. They find balls all over. I don't know. I'm not sure if that is just bad golfing or a little bit of.
It's a combination of both.
Right.
So we have about a little under 5 minutes left, and I want to make sure that we properly plug this book.
Right.
So it is called Boozes in the Kingdom.
Booze
in the Kingdom. Voices from Prohibition, and inside you've got some of the old postcards, and but what are some of the stories that you really think highlight? I mean, obviously it's all.
Yeah, here's another thing. When I first started recording the story of Prohibition years ago, I thought some of the stories that some of the people told me were so far-fetched, I didn't know if they were true. But then I delved into the historic archives of the newspapers, and it really was a wild, weird time. And the stories, like, for example, the smoke screens, some of the rum runners or bootleggers, whatever you want to call them, would make a hole down through their car floor, right over the muffler, and if police officer, revenuers, whatever, got too close behind them, they'd take a can of oil, and sometimes a can of oil and ammonia, and it would create this black stinging cloud. That was widely used. I don't know how effective it was. But on the other hand, I also end it though with my friend who's been on this show before, Fernando Beltran.
Yes, I see his picture on the back of the book
and
here.
Fernando is a retired U.S. Patrol officer, former head of the patrol station on the Citizens Road in Derby.
Yep.
He talks about enforcing the border today and the parallels between enforcing it today versus enforcing it then. Because you got to remember, back in the Prohibition, back in the days of Prohibition, they didn't have radios in their vehicles. They had to go by word of mouth. They had to have people. They had to have strategic stopping points. Today, you know, if they decided, which I'm sure they wouldn't do, they could have a drone strike on smugglers, which I'm not advocating that they're going to do it, but there's the technology. But Fernando will also tell you, while they have all this technology, they still rely on word of mouth and people along the border to help them.
Oh, I'm sure.
So just the photos is worth the book. It's what is it, about 208 pages. It's been a huge seller. It's in a variety of stores throughout the region, whether it be Pick and Shovel, Jimmy Quick, Derby Village, Vista, Country Time, and then like down in Lyndonville, we have Green Mountain Books. But I also sell tons of them on my Northland Journal website, www.northlandjournal.com. So
cool.
But it's actually.
I'm anxious to read. Is this for me? Do I get to keep this?
That is for you. I'm not even going to charge you, but I know what you're going to do. You're going to get off. You're going to go to eBay.
I'm going to sell this. Yeah.
And see how much you can.
Maybe if I have you sign it, it'll be worth a little less.
And so when are we going to have you back on? Yeah, that's true. So when are?
I'm recording an album right now.
Yeah.
So I would say in 2020 is when it'll come out. So we could.
Right.
We could do that then.
Do you have connections that we could get Willie on here, Willie Nelson?
No, I could probably find somebody that looks like him though.
Yeah, because I know you are often fascinated, and you're just with my taste in music. You know, you really appreciate my taste, which kind of don't always jive with yours, but I think you appreciate Willie.
Absolutely.
Right.
I love Willie.
Toby Keith's a different story.
That's a totally different story. All right, so the book is Booze in the Kingdom, Voices from Prohibition. My name's Todd Pronto. I've been filling in for Scott Wheeler because Scott Wheeler is way over there.
Right.
And he is the author of this new book. What do you say I'd say we go get a drink to celebrate, but I don't drink, so
I have coffee. We both do.
We'll have
and
coffee.
By the way, this
We'll
is
have
probably
coffee.
the only time in your life you'll be to the right of me.
That's probably true. Good observation. All right, well, hey, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for having me on my show.
Absolutely.